Jerry Bader Show, 946. All right, now I can't complain to Eric Hovde because he's late because I'm not ready for him. See? Eric Hovde, Senate candidate, does join us in the studio. Eric, good to see you again.
It's great being here.
In the Green Bay area. Actually, now where did my Eric notes go here? This is ridiculous. Okay, there's your name. I mean, there's your campaign logo. So you got to be close here. Actually, Eric yesterday revealed his economic plan. It's 8-point plan?
8-point plan.
8-point plan. Run us through the Clef notes.
Sure. Well, first of all, our economy is struggling. We're growing at half the rate that we typically do post-recession. We have an 8.2% unemployment rate, but when you factor in part-time labor that's looking for a full-time job or people that have given up looking for work, we really have a 14.8% unemployment rate. So our economy is struggling. So I've laid out a plan, a common sense plan to fix our economy and make us the economic engine again. Number one, real simply, we've got to get our debt under control. Think of it this way. If you're a business person and you're thinking of making an investment in a factory or plant and employing a lot of people, and you know you're not going to get a return on that capital for 5, 6, 10 years, are you going to do that if you think the federal government's going to collapse? Spain's collapsing right now. Greece is collapsing right now. We have to get a hold of our debt.
Okay, just interrupt you there, and then I'll let you go on with this, because this is what seems to be the great divide, that nobody believes. Here's the metaphor that I use. The wagon is halfway off the cliff in Europe, and we're about 200 feet behind on the way to the cliff. You cannot convince the American left. They won't believe that we're that close to that disaster.
I don't understand what they can't see. I mean, this is very simple. It's connecting the dots. In fact, we have more debt than all but 4 European countries. Spain actually has less debt to its economy than we do. These countries are going through disaster. Spain's unemployment rate is 24.8%. Their youth unemployment, that means people 25 and under, have an unemployment rate of 54%. It will absolutely happen here in the next 3-4 years if we don't change course. So we have to get control of our debt immediately.
All right, that'll let you finish on your points, but I wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, sure. Number two, we've got to get our economy going again. And one of the best ways we can do that is reforming our tax code. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, higher than any socialist country in Europe, any Latin American country, and any Asian country. Communist China has a 25% corporate tax rate. Again, if you're thinking of building a plant here in the United States versus going right over the Canadian border where their prime minister is moving their corporate tax rate below 20, trying to get to 16%, are you going to build it there, or are you going to build it here in Wisconsin where you're being taxed at 35%? Plus, we've got to reform the tax system. Americans spend $160 to $300 billion a year in just preparing their taxes. And we've got to get rid of all the corporate welfare to fair up the tax system. So that's number two. Number three, let's talk about regulations. One of the things that President Reagan did first when he took office to revitalize the American economy was to deregulate the economy. Jerry, it is estimated that government regulations are costing the private sector over $1.5 trillion. I mean, that's a mind-staggering amount of money. We have 81,000 pages of federal regulation. Now, think of how many regulations are on each page. It's insanity. It's restricting our economy. And the last point I want to make on this, Gallup did a poll, and they asked small business, what is your biggest impediment to hiring? 46% of them said excessive regulation is halting them from hiring more people.
And you are just talking about the federal level.
Absolutely.
And then you've got state, local, and everything else that you're running for U.S. Senate. So you're talking about. So just at the federal level, you have this crushing, and a lot of it, we should point out, this situation was exacerbated since President Obama took office.
Oh, they say that President Obama in his 3 years, just his regulations that he's put in place, are costing the American public $46 billion. I mean, this guy has gone on a big regulatory push. And we have to get back to what Ronald Reagan did, and that is move forward with a massive deregulatory push. Now, the left is going to say, oh, we don't want clean air or clean water, which is lunacy. The reality of it is when you put so many regulations on a business, they're trying to, check all these boxes instead of focusing on the more important things. So we've got to move forward with deregulation.
A couple of other things here. Audit the Fed.
Yes. Reform the Federal Reserve is my point number 4, and point number 5 is reform our financial service industry. Why the Fed? One, the Fed needs to be audited. You need to get rid of their dual mandate. You have to stop appointing academics who've never operated in the capital markets to the Federal Reserve Board. Why? The Federal Reserve is engaging in something called quantitative easing. What is that? It is money printing. Last year, the Federal Reserve, an arm of the government, bought 61% of all treasuries issued by the other arm of the federal government. What does that do? It devalues people's dollars. That means your dollar has less purchasing power against things like gas prices, which is why gas prices have gone up so much, food prices, all base metal prices. Think of gold. Gold's gone from $400 a cubic ounce to over $1,650. So we've got to stop the Fed from money printing, which is masking the massive deficits we're engaging in right now, and it's a backdoor tax on all Americans. And 5, coupled with that, is reforming the financial service industry. Because think of it, the Fed and Wall Street gave us the internet bubble, the housing bubble, and now the government spending bubble. We created these giant companies, and we said they're too big to fail. Well, in my view, if you're too big to fail without a taxpayer bailout, you're too big to exist. We've let the small community and regional banks die. You've had 440 of them collapse or go into bankruptcy in the last 4 years. You have another 770 community banks on the problem bank list. And yet when the big guys that caused the mess got into trouble, they got bailed out and they got taken care of. So we need to change the Fed, and we need to change our policies and regulations on the big giant banks and the way we're dealing with them.
Talking with Senate candidate Eric Hovde. I've got a couple of other things for you, so go ahead and get your last 3 points in.
Sure. Number 6, we've got to repeal Obamacare. It's a disaster. We've the highest rate of inflation in our of any sector in our economy over the last 30 years as health care. The number 2 is higher education. What's the similarity? Massive government involvement. State and federal government now represent 60% of all health care spending. That is why health care costs have gone up. So I don't know why President Obama and the Democrats think centralizing everything to Washington, which they always want to do, and Washington never manages anything well, thinks that putting everything up into Washington to manage our whole healthcare sector is going to work. It will be an unmitigated disaster. We need to move in a private sector approach, give people the power to make their own choices, and for those that are struggling economically, use a premium support system to allow them to buy their own insurance or buy their own health care needs. So that's number 6. Number 7, basic common sense. Become energy independent. I mean, last year, we had a trade deficit of $558 billion. $392 billion of that was the importation of oil. That is just a transference of Americans' money over to the Middle East and, in many cases, countries that are adversaries of ours. We are a country that has an enormous abundance of natural resources. We are the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. We have 270 trillion cubic square feet of natural gas. We should adopt the T. Boone Pickens plan of moving our whole trucking fleet to natural gas. We should build out natural gas stations. Look at North Dakota. Lowest unemployment rate in the country. Why? They're fracking for natural gas. It's caused a massive boom in that state. We need to adopt that nationwide. And we should not only become fully energy independent if we use our God-given resources that we have right here in the U.S., but we could also be an exporter of resources.
Okay, your final?
My final point, we have to end cronyism. Cronyism is where well-connected people get access to the public purse. They can do that through the tax code. They can do that through regulations. They can do that through earmarks or direct appropriations or government contracts or loan guarantees. Think of Solyndra. George Kaiser, one of President Obama's major campaign contributors, wrote a big check to President Obama after he took office. He signed off on a $500 million loan guarantee using taxpayer money. Within 2.5 years, the company goes bankrupt. 1,000 employees lose their job. American taxpayer gets hit for $500 million, and President Obama still has his campaign check. Our country is being eroded by this cronyism, by big business and public unions, and we have to stop it.
Okay, I only have about a minute. I want to share this email with you that we received when I announced that you were going to be on. Jerry, I like Eric Hovde, but I look at winning this U.S. Senate seat as so important, and with Tommy Thompson so well known and leading big time in the polls over his Democratic opponent, that I just cannot take the chance on a lesser-known candidate at this time. Sorry, Eric, says Chris from Marshfield. You've got 45 seconds to win Chris from Marshfield over.
Well, Chris, first of all, I'm beating Tammy by almost the same amount Tommy is. And right now in the polls with Tommy, we're neck and neck, and some polls show me maybe inching ahead. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. Also, you got to think, who is going to be able to connect to the people in the middle, the younger people, across the board? And I think my message can do that. But lastly, you're selecting somebody that's going to go to Washington for the next 6 years. It's going to be a long, hard struggle, and it's going to be a battle. Who has the conservative beliefs and will have the courage to make the hard and tough decisions? I'm not doing this for a political career. I'm trying to avert a financial collapse for our country. I love this country, and I'm going there to serve.
What did anyone know about Ron Johnson 3 years ago outside the flag? Just saying. Eric, it's always good to see you.
Great being on your show, Jerry. It's always wonderful being up here in Green Bay, and I hope everybody has a wonderful morning.
All right, 9:58.